bum bum ba da 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 dum. Ho ya 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 ya. Ho dun dun da da dum. Bum 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 ba da dum. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on this intermediate day of Sukkot? Paula in Chicago, Stephen in New Hampshire, Shandor in the Bronx, Bill in mid-Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck Yehuda in South Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, David in Indiana, Sandy in Michigan. What do you call me? James in Indianapolis, Joseph in Massachusetts, Marjorie in Virginia, Franco in Trieste, Italy, Rochelle in Modesto, wishing everyone a Hag Sameach. And I echo that, Hag Sameach. May your festival be filled with joy. Our daf today is page 51 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through chapter 2, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 8. Challenging page today, not an easy one. The basic idea from Mishnah number 8 is you can't create betrothal to two sisters, right? You can't marry a woman and her sister. You can't even marry a woman's sister after you divorce your wife. If your ex-wife is still alive, you can't marry her sister while she's still alive. So what happens if you try to betroth both of them at the same time? Clearly, if you were already married to one, or if you were already betrothed to one, and you tried to betroth the second one, nothing would happen. That's an impossible betrothal, and so it would be like you tried to make betrothal, but nothing happened. But if you say to two sisters, both of you be betrothed to me, and you say that at the same time, did anything happen or not? So the principle that we're exploring is, well, things that are not permitted to be done sequentially, right? You can betroth one woman, and then you cannot betroth her sister after you're betrothed to the first. So sequentially, you can't betroth both of them. And the principle is if you can't do something sequentially, you're not permitted to do it simultaneously either. But deriving that proof is not simple, complicated, challenging. Buckle up. Okay, here we go. We picked this up at the very bottom of page 50b. The Gemara analyzes the matter. Rabbah says, any matters that cannot be accomplished sequentially cannot be accomplished even if one performs them simultaneously. So Abaye raised an objection to this opinion from a Baraisa. So it seems like maybe there is a situation where you can't do it sequentially, but you can do it simultaneously. So maybe the principle, as a general principle, doesn't hold up. And what is the example that Abaye raises to object to Rabbah's principle? So now we're in 51a. In the case of one who increases tithes. Okay, so increasing tithes. What does this mean? A tithe, actually the word means, Meiser, it actually talks about a tenth. Right? So if you're a farmer in Israel, temple is standing, you bring in a crop, okay? And so before you're permitted to eat from that crop, you have to tithe it. We've discussed this many times. The first 2% goes to the priest as teruma. The next tenth goes to a Levite. And the next tenth after that is second tithe. And then in some years of the 7-year cycle, first, second, fourth, and fifth, that's a second tithe, Meiser Sheni, that you would use when you make your pilgrimage festival to Jerusalem, like during Sukkot, during this holiday that we're in right now. And in the 3rd and 6th years of the 7-year cycle, it's the poor man's tithe. That second tithe is given to the poor. Okay, but when we're talking about increasing tithes, we're really talking about the first tithe as opposed to teruma. So it's that 10th for the Levite. And we still, right, if we're being pious Jews, tithe 10% of our net income, right? So whatever your actual income is that goes to your pocket, 1/10 of that you should give to charity. Now you can increase that up to 20%. It's not recommended to give more than 20% unless you're very rich. And you can give away half of your income and you're still going to be so comfortable with the remaining half, you could do whatever you want. But general guidelines are you give away 10% to charity, and if you're an especially pious person, you can give away up to 20%. But when we're actually talking about tithing produce, it's very important that this happens because if you don't tithe the produce properly, then the untithed produce from which tithe has not been removed, is inedible. You are not permitted to eat produce that has not been tithed. So if you decided to be a pious person and you're going to tithe, I guess for the sake of the Levite, more than 10%, you're going to give 20% to the Levites. Okay, you're feeling especially grateful. It's been a great year and you want to give away more as a way to say thank you to God. So you're going to give 20% to the Levites. You can do that. And you can certainly say, I'm now separating 20%, and that 20% is for the Levites. Okay, so the rest of the produce is tithed, and the 20% that you separated for the Levites is going to go to the Levites. That's all good. The problem is if you take out 10% of the produce, and then you say, you know what, I'm going to give an additional 10%. Now it's tricky. Because when you take that second 10%, you're taking it from produce that was already tithed. And now this produce that you take, that you're designating as an additional tithe, introduces complications that are actually going to be difficult complications. So, in the case of one who increases tithes, right, meaning he's sequentially adding a second 10%. In the case of one who increases tithes, meaning he tithes 2/10 instead of 1/10 of his produce, but he doesn't do it all at the same time, the remainder of his produce, this is rendered fit for consumption as he tithed it properly. But the tithes themselves are ruined, as the additional tithe is neither a tithe nor tithed produce, since it is unclear which of the 2/10 is the actual tithe and which is not. Because the first tithe was tithe for all of it. The second 10% that you took, it's not Meiser Sheni, it's an attempt to make additional first tithe. But did it all become first tithe? Which portion of what you were taking is already tithe produce and which is meant to accomplish what you now want, which is this 20% tithe? That's where it gets very, very complicated. So that's why the sages say the remainder of his produce is rendered fit for consumption. The rest, that was tithe. But the tithes are ruined, as the additional tithe is neither a tithe nor tithed produce. Since it is unclear which of the 2/10, or what among the 2/10, which he now just put together, what is the actual tithe and which is not, the entire 2/10 may be treated neither as a tithe nor as tithe produce. But according to Rabba's opinion, why is the rest of the produce rendered fit for consumption? Let us say that any matters that cannot be accomplished sequentially cannot be accomplished even if one performs them simultaneously. Since one cannot designate a tithe of 2/10 sequentially, 1/10 followed by a second 10, he should be precluded from simultaneously designating 2/10 of his produce as a tithe. Accordingly, it should be considered as though he had not designated any tithe at all, and his produce should not be regarded as tithed produce. So Rabbah said to Abaye, the case of tithe is different. You're not going to bring a proof about my general principle that which cannot be accomplished sequentially also cannot be accomplished simultaneously. You're not going to bring a proof against my principle from the case of tithes because tithes are a whole realm in and of themselves, right? Rabbah said to him, the case of tithe is different, as tithe status takes effect partially, i.e. on less than a unit of produce. For example, if one said, let half of each grain of wheat be designated as tithe, he has designated it. Just as one can designate an entire grain of wheat as tithe, he can likewise designate a half a grain. And in this case too, when one tithes 2/10 of the produce, the ruling is not that 1/10 is the actual tithe and the other 10th is untithed produce. Instead, half of each grain of the designated portion is tithe, while the other half of each grain is not. Accordingly, the remainder of the produce is tithe, as 1/10 of the total has been designated as first tithe, and the portion designated as tithe is ruined because it is impossible to identify which part of each grain is designated. In other words, that first 10th is now intermingled with this second 10th, which you might want to give it to a Levite, but what you've done is intermingle tithe produce with untithed produce, or tithe produce with tithe, and the tithe actually is consecrated, the tithe produce is not, and so now you've got this mingling of tithe and tithe produce, right, which should not be mingled. Now the Gemara raises another objection to Rabbah's opinion. But what about the case of animal tithe, which does not take effect partially, as one cannot consecrate half an animal for his tithe, and likewise, there is no possibility to separate animals sequentially, as once one has designated one animal as animal tithe, right? If you're a shepherd, you have a big flock, so then you can identify which are the new sheep that were born this year, and you put them in a separate corral, and you have to tithe 1/10 of this year's increase to be given, right, to the Levites. So how do you do that? You pass them under the rod, right? So you pass them under the rod, and you count, and the 10th one, each time you reach the number 10, you put a mark on that sheep, and that is the tithe, the animal tithe. And the problem comes in when you lose your place in the counting and you're not sure which is the 10th animal that passes under the rod, or when two animals, slither through under the rod at the same time, right? You counted 9, and now when you're up to number 10, 2 sheep go through together. Well, which one is the 10th? Impossible to know. So what do? And Rava says, if 2 animals emerged from the enclosure together as the 10th, and he called them both the 10th, well, then the 10th and the 11th animals are intermingled with each other. One is consecrated with the sanctity of animal tithe, while the other remains a peace offering. But there's no way to determine which is which. So the question arises, if the principle that any matters that cannot be accomplished sequentially cannot be accomplished even if one performs them simultaneously, if this principle is correct, well, then neither animal is consecrated, as one cannot designate both the 10th and the 11th animals as animal tithe, one after the other, right? So if that principle was really true, that things that cannot happen sequentially, you can't say that the 10th is the 10th and then that the 11th is also the 10th, because the 10th was the 10th. If 2 animals emerge simultaneously in the 10th spot, and the principle is true, that things that cannot be done sequentially can't happen simultaneously either, then neither animal was consecrated, and you could just put them both back in the pen, and now whichever one comes out first, that one's going to be the 10th. But if indeed the principle doesn't always hold, and these 2 animals that emerged together in the 10th spot were consecrated, and that is the law, one is the tithe, the other is a peace offering, and you don't know which is which, but both of them are consecrated, and you have to treat them that way, and then how we deal with that is another matter. But the point is, that seems to be a proof that the principle is not true, that things that cannot be accomplished sequentially sometimes can be accomplished simultaneously, just not in the case of betrothing 2 women who are sisters. So the Gemara rejects this idea that the animal tithe and what happens when 2 animals emerge simultaneously is a proof that Rava's principle, that Rabba's principle that things that cannot happen sequentially also don't happen simultaneously, we cannot use the animal tithe to disprove that, right? Animal tithe is different, as two animals can be designated as animal tithe one after the other in the case of an error. We already have this principle. Although one cannot designate the 10th and 11th animals as the animal tithe ab initio, if the person did so in error, well, then they are both consecrated. And we learn this in a Mishna in Bechoros, page 60a. If one erred, one made a mistake and called the 9th animal the 10th, and then he made another mistake and called the 10th animal the 9th, and the 11th animal the 10th, all three animals are consecrated. The first is consecrated because you called it the 10th. The second is consecrated because it really is the 10th. And the third is consecrated because it was designated as the 10th. So apparently more than one animal can be consecrated as the animal tithe if the designation was made in error. In Rava's example as well, a modicum of sanctity applies to the two animals that emerged together and were together designated as the 10th because we have to deal with animal tithes in some way. That doesn't disprove Rava's principle. Now, the Gemara raises another objection to Rabba's principle. There is the case of the 40 loaves that accompany a thanksgiving offering, which are not consecrated if they were designated in error, and are also not consecrated if two sets of loaves were designated for the same offering sequentially. And yet, it was stated that the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, disagreed with regard to a thanksgiving offering that was slaughtered accompanied by 80 loaves, right? Because normally that kind of offering is accompanied by 40 loaves. 30 of them are different kinds of three different kinds of matzah, and 10 of the 40 are leavened bread. But at any rate, when you bring a thanksgiving offering, part of the requirements of that are to bring these 40 loaves of bread with it. Not 80, 40. So what happens if this person designates 80 instead of 40 to be the accompanying loaves? Did he actually designate 80 loaves, or did he do nothing? Or are 40 of the 80 going to be the accompanying loaves? How are we going to deal with that? Let's find out. Where am I? And yet it was stated that the Amoraim disagreed with regard to the thanksgiving offering that was slaughtered accompanied by 80 loaves, which is twice the required amount. Chizkiah said 40 of the 80 loaves are consecrated, even though their identity cannot be determined. 40 became the thanksgiving offering loaves. The other 40 are not. They're intermingled, so we're going to have a case of uncertainty. Rabbi Yochanan said not even 40 of the 80 loaves are consecrated. Right? He's saying because you needed to designate 40 and you designated 80, you ended up designating nothing. Just reloading my video here. Okay. So, what is it that Yehoshua ben Levi what is it that Chizkiah and Yochanan are disagreeing about with regard to this principle of Yehoshua ben Levi? No, I'm sorry. What does Yehoshua ben Levi say that Chizkiah and Yochanan are disagreeing about? Well, they disagree only with regard to a case where the one bringing the thanks offering designates 80 loaves without specification of how many loaves he wants consecrated. He hasn't said that he wants to end up with 80 loaves consecrated. He just said that these 80 loaves are set aside for my thanksgiving offering. But he's not saying that I want these 80 loaves to accompany the thanksgiving offering and be the consecrated loaves. What he might be saying is I'm setting aside 80 to make sure that in case some of them get ruined or stolen or mice attack them or whatever, that I will have the 40 that I need at the time that I'm bringing the offering. So one sage, Chizkiah, holds, although he designated 80 loaves, he wants to consecrate only 40. And when he set aside 80, he merely intends to ensure that he will have 40 when the offering is brought. So he therefore brought the extra loaves so that the first 40 loaves are lost or become ritually impure. The second 40 will be consecrated in their place. Consequently, the first 40 loaves are consecrated. And the other sage, Rabbi Yochanan, holds that this person intends to bring a large offering of 80 loaves. And therefore, none of the loaves are consecrated because he over-designated. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's explanation of the dispute accords with Rabbah's opinion that things that cannot be done sequentially can't happen simultaneously either. Now, the Gemara turns from its analysis of Rabbah's opinion to the original issue. If one tries to betroth two sisters, did he betroth either of them at all? Why does Rava explain our Mishnah about attempting to betroth two women in accordance with the opinion of Rava in this principle of sequential versus simultaneous? Let him derive the law in accordance with a principle of his own. As elsewhere he establishes that betrothal that is not given to consummation is not betrothal at all. And all of these cases are in this category. Right? He already established a principle that any betrothal in which it is prohibited for the couple to engage in sexual intercourse is not considered betrothal at all. Can you betroth your own sister? No, because you're not allowed to marry her, because you're not allowed to sleep with her. You can't marry your sister. You can't sleep with your sister, therefore you can't marry your sister, therefore you can't betroth your sister. You might have thought that if you tried to betroth your sister, okay, you're not going to be permitted to marry her because you can't sleep with her, but the betrothal has some kind of effect, and now before she can go and marry someone else, she's going to have to get a get from you. And the answer is no, she does not, because betrothal that cannot lead to consummation is not betrothal at all, according to Rava. So here, since you're not going to be able to sleep with the two sisters, why don't we just apply the same principle and say that the attempt to betroth two sisters is not betrothal at all because it does not lead to consummation? And a possible answer is, well, you can betroth one of the sisters. That's permitted. So you can't say that it's absolutely impossible to have any consummation out of this situation. And maybe that's why Rava went to Rava's principle about what you can't do sequentially, I cannot do simultaneously. Let's see what the Gemara says. And the Gemara answers, well, Rava could have explained the Mishnah this way, that, you know, any betrothal that it is impossible to lead to consummation is not betrothal at all. He could have explained the Mishnah this way. But he stated his explanation in accordance with the statement of Rami Bar Chama. Rava should be understood as saying, your opinion that the ruling of the Mishnah is derived from a verse is incorrect, as the verse is referring only to one who betroths the two sisters or the mother and daughter sequentially. Instead, you should explain the Mishnah as referring to one who betroths them at the same time, with the reason being that any matters that cannot be accomplished sequentially cannot be accomplished even if one performs them simultaneously. Right? We know that it can't be done sequentially. The question is, why is it that they can't, that nothing takes effect when we try to do it simultaneously? Is it because consummation is impossible? Not necessarily, because you could marry one of them. And it must be because, at least according to Rava, because he holds by Rava's principle that things which cannot be done sequentially also cannot be done simultaneously. New subject. It was stated that Amoraim had a dispute with regard to betrothal that is not given to consummation. Abaye says it is betrothal, since the prohibition against engaging in sexual intercourse does not affect the betrothal itself. So according to Abaye, if you betroth your sister, something happened. You are not allowed to marry her. You're going to have to give her a get so that she can go free and marry someone else. But some kind of betrothal happened, and that's why the get is necessary. That's Abaye. Rava says no. Betrothal that is not given to consummation is not betrothal at all. Driving me bananas. Sorry. Showtime. Focus. Now I won't be getting those buzzes. Rava says it is not betrothal. Rava says the sage Bar Ahina explain to me that this law is derived from the verse Deuteronomy 24:1, when a man takes a woman and engages in sexual intercourse with her, as it indicates that betrothal that is given to permitted consummation is betrothal, whereas betrothal that is not given to consummation is not betrothal at all. And the Gemara proceeds to analyze these two opinions, right? So this is Abaye versus Rava. So we learned in the Mishna, our Mishnah that we're discussing now, in the case of one who betroths a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her sister, in one act of betrothal, neither of them is betrothed. And the Gemara analyzes this. But if he said he is betrothing only one of this pair, i.e. the woman or her daughter, or one of that pair, meaning either the woman or her sister, without specifying which of them, she is betrothed. Now this is an interesting thing. If he said, with this bag of money, let's say, I hereby betroth one of those two sisters. This guy's not picky. He just wants to marry into that family. So he says, I want to create betrothal with one of the sisters. Now we already said if he says I betroth both of the sisters, nothing has happened. But if he says, I hereby betroth one of the sisters with this bag of money, does betrothal happen? Let's say they both accept. They say, good with me. Both say good with me. So which one is betrothed? Is it the first one to say yes? Is it for him to choose later? Is it that we can't be certain which one was betrothed and which one was not? So he actually has to give a get to both of them? Let's keep reading. So he's in the. But if he said, I'm betrothing one of this pair, either a woman or her daughter, or one of the two sisters, then there is betrothal. She is betrothed. Doesn't say which. So nevertheless, in practice, it is prohibited for him to engage in intercourse with either of them, as it cannot be determined which woman he betrothed and which woman is the relative of his betrothed. So he has to give a get to both of them. But why should the betrothal take effect at all? These are each a betrothal that is not given to consummation, since you just said he's not going to be able to consummate with either one of them since it's unclear which one he betrothed. And if it's true that betrothal that is not given to consummation is not betrothal at all, why are we saying that some kind of betrothal took effect and he has to give a get to both of them? It should be, there is no betrothal at all. Right? But why should betrothal take effect? These are each a case of betrothal that is not given to consummation, should not be valid according to Rava. Shall we then say that this is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rava? And the Gemara answers, Rava could have said to you in response, and according to your reasoning, that a betrothal that is not given to consummation is still betrothal, well, say that the latter clause of our Mishnah, that an incident occurred involving 5 women, and among them were 2 sisters, and one man gathered a basket of figs that were from their field, and the fruit was of the sabbatical year, and he said, you are hereby betrothed, all of you are hereby betrothed to me with this basket. And one of them accepted the basket on behalf of all of them. And the sages said, they are all betrothed except for the 2 sisters, neither of whom are betrothed. So this indicates that it is the sisters who are not betrothed, but the unrelated women. The sages just said the sisters are not betrothed, which indicates that it is the sisters who are not betrothed, but the unrelated women, the other 3 women who are not related to each other, they are betrothed. And so the Gemara continues to explain what Rava could have said. So what are the circumstances? If we say that the man said, you are all betrothed to me, well, this is comparable to one who gives something to another and says, let you and the donkey acquire this item. And in a situation where someone would say, let you and the donkey acquire it, the recipient has not acquired the item. Why? Because the donkey cannot acquire items. A donkey cannot acquire items. It's not a human. So therefore, the person does not acquire it either. Since a person said here, you and the donkey acquire this item, because the donkey cannot acquire, the whole statement is meaningless, and the person didn't acquire either. Here too, since he tried to give the item of the betrothal to all of the women, some of whom the sisters he cannot betroth because he can't betroth two sisters together. So then the betrothal should not take effect even with the other women, despite the fact that they are suitable for him. So rather, now we're on 51b, is it not referring to a case where he said to them, one of you is betrothed? And it teaches that the sisters are not betrothed because with regard to the sisters, the betrothal is not given to consummation. But if, one of the others is suitable for betrothal, and so one of them was betrothed. And the Gemara comments, if so, if that's what the case was, then the first clause of the Mishnah would be difficult for Rava, while the last clause would be difficult for Abaye. And the Gemara presents a resolution. Abaye explains the last clause according to his line of reasoning, and Rava explains the first clause of the Mishnah according to his line of reasoning. Abaye explains the last clause according to his line of reasoning as follows. In the case of one who betroths a woman and her daughter, or a woman and her sister in one act of betrothal, neither of them is betrothed. But if he betrothed one of a pair consisting of a woman and her daughter, or one of a pair consisting of two sisters, by saying the words, one of you is betrothed to me, then each of them is betrothed as a matter of uncertainty, and both members of the pair require a bill of divorce so that they are free to marry other people. He can't marry them, but before they can go marry someone else, they need a get. Despite the fact that betrothal is not given to consummation, in this case, some kind of betrothal with, due to uncertainty was created and the get is required. So the Gemara continues Abaye's explanation. And if the man explicitly said, the one of you who is fit for sexual intercourse with me shall be betrothed to me, well, then neither of them is betrothed, as he cannot engage in intercourse with either, not knowing which of them is his betrothed and which of them is the relative of his betrothed. And an incident also occurred involving 5 women, and among them were 2 sisters. And one man gathered a basket of figs and said, the one among you who is fit for intercourse with me shall be betrothed to me with this basket. And the sages said, the sisters are not betrothed. They can't be included among the ones, the women, one of whom might be betrothed. One of whom is betrothed, but we're not sure which. And Rava would explain our Mishnah in a different way. He would explain according to his line of reasoning. So in the case of one who betroths one of a pair, consisting of a woman and her daughter or a woman and her sister, it becomes like one who simultaneously betrothed a woman and her daughter or a woman and her sister, and there is no betrothal at all. And the incident which occurred that's described in our Mishnah, where one guy with a basket of figs said to 5 women, 2 of whom were sisters, be betrothed to me with this basket, and the sages said the sisters are not betrothed. So since the Mishnah can be read in either of the, So continuing, right, the way Rava would explain it, and one man gathered a basket of figs and said, all of you, and one of the 2 sisters are hereby betrothed to me with this basket, and the sages said the sisters are not betrothed. So since the Mishnah can be read in either of these 2 ways, nothing can be proven from it with regard to the issue of betrothal that is not given to consummation. So the Gemara suggests a different approach. Come and hear a proof from a Mishnah in this tractate on page 64b. In the case of one who betroths his daughter, his minor daughter, to a man without specification. Oh, he has more than one daughter. So in the case of one who betroths his daughter to a man without specifying which of his daughters he meant, the grown women are not included. In other words, if he has multiple daughters, some of which are adults and some of which are still minors, and he says, be betrothed to my daughter, and he didn't say which daughter he meant, well, among the possibilities of which daughter he meant, the adult daughters are not included. Right, because it's a mitzvah for a man to betroth his minor daughter to a prospective suitor, but it's not his job to betroth his adult daughters because they betroth themselves. So the grown women are not included among those who might be the daughter that he betrothed without specifying which daughter. Why? Because he does not have a right to betroth the adult daughters. Now the Gemara analyzes this. One can infer that the minor daughters are included. And now, since if he has multiple minor daughters, okay, so it's his job to betroth them. They don't betroth themselves. He does it. So if he has multiple daughters who are both minors, and he said, be betrothed to my daughter, and he didn't say which, okay, so then it's possible that he meant either one. So both of them now are betrothed as a matter of uncertainty, and the man who betroths them is going to have to give a get so that both of them are released from this betrothal of uncertainty. And then the Gemara asks, but why are the minor daughters both betrothed? Each of these betrothals is a betrothal that is not given to consummation, since he did not specify which of the minor daughters he had in mind. And you can't betroth both of them since they're sisters. Therefore, according to Rava, betrothals should not take effect at all. There should be no betrothal. You don't need to give a get, and there's no betrothal of uncertainty. There's no betrothal, period, according to Rava. So this is a conclusive refutation of Rava, because in fact, the sages said there is betrothal of uncertainty, and the man will have to give a get to both of them. But the Gemara answers, whoa, this doesn't disprove Rava. Rava could have said to you, with what are we dealing here? It is when there is only one adult daughter and one minor daughter. Consequently, once the adult daughter is removed from consideration, it is clear that the father has betrothed the minor daughter, and the betrothal is given to consummation because only one of the sisters is betrothed, and that's the one that the father had a right to betroth, and that's the minor daughter. Eventually, when she marries, the husband can sleep with her. So the Gemara questions this explanation, but that Mishnah teaches grown women in the plural. And the Gemara answers, what is the meaning of grown women? It means grown women in general. In other words, whenever people betroth their daughters without further specification, only the minor daughters and not the adult daughters are included as possibilities of who was betrothed. And the Gemara asks, well, if so, that there are only two daughters, then what is the purpose of stating this? What novel law does it teach? It's obvious. And the Gemara answers, with what are we dealing here? It's a situation where his adult daughter designated her father as her agent to betroth her. So the father has a right, as the father of a minor daughter, to betroth the minor daughter. His adult daughter, he has no right to betroth her, but she might have come to the father and say, Dad, act as my agent and, find the man and betroth him to me, acting as my agent. So now he does have a right. So now if he said, be betrothed to my daughter, to this potential suitor, which daughter did he mean? The minor daughter, that it's a mitzvah for him to betroth, or the older daughter where he's acting as her agent? Lest you say that when he accepts betrothal from someone on behalf of his daughter without further specification, that he accepts it with her in mind, and he intended to betroth her rather than his minor daughter, the Mishnah therefore teaches us that a person does not set aside something from which he has benefit, for example, the betrothal of his minor daughter, where he keeps the betrothal money, in favor of something from which he has no benefit, for example, the betrothal of his adult daughter, where he's acting as an agent to receive the money for her, but the money goes to her. So the Gemara raises a difficulty. Aren't we also dealing with a case where the adult daughter said to him, when you betroth me, my betrothal money is for you? Okay, so accordingly, he derives benefit from her betrothal as well. So then the Gemara explains, even so, the father would not have intended to betroth his adult daughter, since a person does not set aside a mitzvah that is incumbent upon him, for example, the betrothal of his minor daughter, in order to perform a mitzvah that is not incumbent upon him, for example, the betrothal of his adult daughter. So the Gemara further suggests, coming here approved from the Mishna on page 64b, with regard to one who has two groups of daughters from two women. For example, he has multiple daughters from his first wife, and after his first wife died, he remarried and had multiple daughters with his second wife. And then he says, I betrothed my elder daughter to someone, but I do not know if it was the eldest of the older group of daughters, or if it was the eldest of the younger group of daughters, or if it was the youngest of the older group, who is nevertheless older than the eldest of the younger group. Well, in this case, all the daughters are prohibited from marrying someone else without first receiving a get. except for the youngest of the younger group, who is certainly not betrothed. Right? Remember, what are we dealing with here? We're talking with a dad who was, really creating problems by making a bonehead move. Right? The dad was not clear when he said, okay, young man, I like you. I like your family. I think that you would be good for one of my daughters. Do you want to marry one of my daughters? Yes, I do, sir. Okay, be betrothed to my daughter. And he didn't say which daughter. And so maybe he had in mind the daughter, and that's the one he wanted to specify, but he didn't specify. So now he doesn't know which daughter he meant when he accepted betrothal with this young man. And so since it could have been any of these daughters, or, if the language is the elder daughter, but he has, two sets of daughters from two wives, so one set is multiple daughters, all of whom are older than the group of daughters from the second wife. Okay, but it's still not clear which daughter he meant. Any daughter that might have been, there's a possibility that she was the one that he had in mind, so betrothal might have been created for her, and before she can go marry someone else, she's going to need a get from this guy. It's a big, big balagan, as they say in Israel. A big problem. Okay. So all of them need a get. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. All of them need a get except the youngest of the youngest group, because she certainly could not have been in the father's mind when he said, my elder daughter. This betrothal is not given to consummation, since each daughter could be the sister of the one who was actually betrothed, and yet the betrothal is considered valid, as otherwise they would all be permitted to marry without requiring a get, right? Some kind of betrothal due to uncertainty was created for all of the possible daughters, even though if we tried to betroth them all simultaneously, or even sequentially after the first one, none of those, once one of them is betrothed, this man can never sleep with any of the other sisters. But because this uncertainty was created, we say that betrothal was possibly created with all of them, and they all need a get. So it must be that the principle betrothal, which is not given to consummation, is not betrothal at all. It must be that that principle does not hold. So the Gemara rejects that proof. With what are we dealing here? It is a situation where they were identified and later intermingled. In other words, this Mishna is not dealing with one who betrothed a daughter without specifying which one. Rather, he initially stated which daughter he intended to betroth, but subsequently he forgot. So the actual betrothal is given to consummation, right? Because really, it was fine. One daughter was betrothed properly. He just can't remember which one, right? So there is the possibility of consummation since one of them was betrothed properly. He just doesn't know which one it is. The actual betrothal is given to consummation, so the daughters are betrothed due to uncertainty. So the Gemara comments, and the language of the Mishna is also precise, as it teaches that he said, I do not know, in the first person and in the present tense, indicating that he did know which daughter he betrothed at one point, but he does not know now. And it does not teach that he said, it is not known, I never knew, it was never known. And the Gemara affirms, learn from the language of the Mishnah that we are indeed dealing with a case where one daughter was properly betrothed, but then it was forgotten which daughter that was. They became intermingled, and that's why we have a bunch of betrothals due to uncertainty, and they all require a get. But we can't say that there's no betrothal because there's no possibility of consummation because one daughter was betrothed properly. And the Gemara asks, if so, what is the purpose of stating this? What novel law does this teach? And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah serves to exclude the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, who says a person does not place himself into a position of uncertainty. And when he said elder daughter, he must have meant the eldest of the older group, who is the absolute eldest. And Rabbi Meir teaches us that a person does place himself into a situation of uncertainty, and the uncertainty applies to each of his daughters, except for the youngest of the younger group. And the Gemara further suggests, come in here a proof from a Mishnah, Yevamos 23b, in the case of one who betrothed one of two sisters, and he does not know which one he betrothed, he must give a get to this one and a get to that one due to the uncertainty. This betrothal is not given to consummation. You can't sleep with both sisters. So why do they require bills of divorce? And the Gemara answers, with what are we dealing here? It is when they were identified and later intermingled. The actual betrothal was properly done and therefore given to consummation. But now that he doesn't remember which sister he betrothed, they're both betrothed due to uncertainty. And the Gemara comments, the language of the Mishna is also precise as it teaches the phrase, he does not know, indicating that he did know at one time, but he does not know now. And the Mishnah was not worded as, it is not known. He knew once, he just does not know now. The Gemara poses a question, if so, what is the purpose of stating this? What novel law does this teach? And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to teach the latter clause of that Mishnah. If this man died and had one brother, the brother performs chalitza with both of the sisters, but he cannot perform yibum with either of them because one of them is the sister of his yavama who is forbidden to him by rabbinic law. If he had two brothers, one of them performs chalitza with one of the sisters, but may not take her in yibum due to the possibility that she is the sister of a woman with whom he has a yibum bond. Usually I always explain what yibum and chalitza and the yavama are, but I feel like you guys have heard that 1,000 times. Let's just get to the end. And I'm very close to the end. So if you have a question or comment, please get it in now. And then one of them takes the other in yibum if he so desires. So if both brothers married the sisters before consulting the court does not remove them from their marriage, and they are permitted to remain married. Although the first couple should have performed chalitza, the court does not force them to divorce. And the Gemara explains the novelty of the latter clause. And this is effective specifically if one brother first performs chalitza, and afterward the second brother performs yibum. But if one brother first performs yibum, and afterward the other brother performs chalitza, well then the yibum would not take effect as he is possibly encountering the sister of the woman bound to him by ties of levirate marriage. Until the yavam is released through chalitza, her sister is considered to a certain extent the sister of his wife due to the ties of the levirate bond. So the one who performs levirate marriage might have chosen the sister of the woman betrothed by the dead brother. To unpack that would take me another 15 minutes, so we're just going to let it go. And we're going to pick it up here at the bottom of page 51b tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. All right, let me see if we've got a couple of questions or comments on Kiddushin 51. Nina says, no questions. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. All the best. Hag Sameach, Modim L'Simcha, Good Mud.